don't think it's right to make those comparisons. It's completely different. And the Prime Minister said yesterday, I think almost in the same breath, talked about the diverse country that we are and that being part of our strength.
I'm not saying it is Enoch Powell. I'm saying, did he know? Yeah. Did his speechwriters know? Did you know that he was echoing Enoch Powell?
I don't know.
And are you uncomfortable with it?
You know, everybody always gets caught up in focusing on different phrases and so on, but we do have to.
Britain's bold Palestinian gambit. Cooper's diplomatic revolution. Right. Before we dive into what might be the most consequential foreign policy shift Britain has made in decades, smash that subscribe button because UK Connors is your gateway to understanding the political machinations that actually matter. Today's revelation will fundamentally change how you view Britain's role on the world stage. Yvette Cooper has just detonated a diplomatic bomb that's reverberating from Whitehall to Westminster, and frankly, most of you probably miss it while scrolling through your feeds. But here's the thing about seismic political shifts. They rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They slip through press releases, buried beneath celebrity gossip and football transfers, until suddenly you wake up and realize the world has fundamentally changed overnight. The Foreign Secretary stood before the United Nations General Assembly, looked the international community squarely in the eye, and declared that Britain's recognition of Palestine was not merely diplomatic courtesy, but an act of urgency and principle. Now, if you think that's just another politician reading from a teleprompter, you completely misunderstood the gravity of what's just unfolded. This isn't Westminster Theatre. This is Britain repositioning itself as a genuine power broker in the world's most intractable conflict. Let me paint you the picture Cooper presented, because it reads like something from a dystopian nightmare that become our geopolitical reality. She described Gaza as an unbearable humanitarian catastrophe, language so stark it would make even the most hardened diplomat pause. But Cooper didn't stop there. She directly accused Benjamin Netanyahu of allowing children in Gaza to starve to death. Think about that for a moment. The Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, speaking for His Majesty's government, essentially called the Israeli Prime Minister complicit in child starvation. That's not diplomatic language. That's a declaration of moral bankruptcy aimed squarely at Israel's leadership. The audacity is breathtaking, isn't it? Here's Britain, historically Israel's steadfast ally, publicly eviscerating Netanyahu on the world's most prominent diplomatic stage. But Cooper's genius lies not in the accusation itself, but in the broader strategic framework she's constructing. She's positioning Britain as a reasonable adult in a room full of extremists, and frankly, it's brilliant politics wrapped in moral authority. Cooper's warning that the two-state solution is in profound peril isn't just diplomatic hand-wringing. It's a carefully calibrated message that Britain sees itself as a solution savior. She's simultaneously criticizing extremists on both sides whilst positioning Palestinian statehood as an inalienable right. The intellectual dexterity required to thread that needle whilst maintaining credibility with both sides is genuinely impressive, regardless of where you stand politically. But here's where it gets properly interesting. Cooper's defense of Palestine recognition as both urgent and principled reveals a Labour government that prepared to take genuine political risks for foreign policy objectives. Remember, this isn't some throwaway gesture designed to appease left-wing activists. This is Britain fundamentally relining its Middle Eastern strategy whilst most of the public remains blissfully unaware of the implications. The timing is absolutely crucial, and Cooper knows it. With the Gaza conflict dominating the UN General Assembly agenda, Britain's move isn't happening in isolation. Other nations are following suit, creating a diplomatic avalanche that could fundamentally reshape international recognition of Palestinian statehood. Cooper isn't just riding this wave. She's helping to create it, positioning Britain as a leader rather than a follower in international affairs. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the domestic political calculations that make this move so fascinating. Labour's traditional support base includes significant Muslim populations who view Palestinian recognition as a moral imperative. But Cooper's framing transcends crude electoral mathematics. She's presenting this as Britain reclaiming moral leadership on the world stage, positioning the UK as the honest broker that can deliver what decades of American-led diplomacy has failed to achieve. The intellectual framework Cooper's constructed is remarkably sophisticated. By acknowledging Palestinian statehood as an inalienable right while simultaneously condemning extremism on both sides, she's creating space for Britain to engage with all parties whilst maintaining moral authority. It's classic diplomatic triangulation, but executed with a precision that suggests serious strategic thinking behind the rhetoric. Cooper's direct confrontation with Netanyahu reveals something profound about Britain's evolving relationship with Israel. Gone are the days when criticism was whispered in private diplomatic channels. This is public accountability politics, where Britain's foreign secretary feels comfortable directly challenging Israeli policy on an international stage. The implication for the special relationship between Britain and Israel cannot be overstated. The humanitarian language Cooper employs isn't accidental diplomatic rhetoric. By describing the situation in Gaza as an unbearable humanitarian catastrophe, she's creating a moral framework that makes British action not just justified but necessary. This isn't Britain meddling in foreign affairs. This is Britain responding to a humanitarian emergency with the tools of diplomacy and recognition. But perhaps most intriguingly, Cooper's approach suggests Labour believes there's genuine political capital to be gained from bold foreign policy positions. Rather than the cautious incrementalism that's characterized British foreign policy for decades, we're seeing a government prepared to take clear moral stances on complex international issues. It's a remarkable shift that speaks to Labour's confidence in their political mandate. The strategic implications extend far beyond the Middle East. By positioning Britain as a principled actor prepared to challenge traditional allies when they overstep moral boundaries, Cooper is signaling a more independent foreign policy approach. This isn't Britain following American foreign policy leadership. This is Britain charting its own course based on what it perceives as moral imperatives. Cooper's warning about the two-state solution's peril serves multiple purposes. It creates urgency around British involvement, justifies the recognition decision, and positions Britain as a solution's guardian. The intellectual sophistication of this approach suggests a Foreign Office that's thinking several moves ahead in the diplomatic chess game that defines international relations. The broader context of international Palestine recognition during the UN General Assembly reveals Cooper's strategic timing. Rather than making this move in isolation, Britain is part of a coordinated international response that amplifies the diplomatic impact. It's multilateral diplomacy at its most effective, where Britain leads by example whilst building international consensus. What makes Cooper's position genuinely compelling is a refusal to engage in false equivalences. Whilst acknowledging extremism on both sides, she's created a clear moral hierarchy that places Palestinian statehood rights above Israeli settlement expansion. It's a nuanced position that maintains diplomatic flexibility whilst establishing clear principles. The domestic political risks of Cooper's approach cannot be understated. Jewish communities in Britain, traditionally supportive of conservative foreign policy, now face a Labour government openly critical of Israeli leadership. Yet Cooper's careful framing of opposition to Netanyahu rather than Israel itself suggests sophisticated political calculation designed to minimize domestic backlash whilst maximizing international impact. Cooper's description of Palestinian statehood as an inalienable right represents a fundamental shift in British diplomatic language. Previous governments spoke of Palestinian aspirations or legitimate interests. Cooper is speaking of rights, language that carries legal and moral weight that transcend political convenience. It's a remarkable evolution in British foreign policy thinking. The humanitarian catastrophe framing Cooper employs creates moral urgency that justifies dramatic policy shifts. By linking British action to humanitarian imperatives rather than political calculations, she's created a framework that makes opposition to a position appear morally questionable. It's brilliant political positioning wrapped in humanitarian concern. But perhaps what's most impressive about Cooper's approach is a confidence in Britain's ability to influence outcomes. Rather than accepting American diplomatic leadership as inevitable, she's positioning Britain as an independent actor capable of shaping international responses to complex crises. It represents a genuinely post-Brexit foreign policy approach where Britain leverages moral authority rather than economic power. The implications for British-Israeli relations are profound and potentially permanent. Cooper's direct criticism of Netanyahu isn't diplomatic protest that can be smoothed over with private conversations. This is public accountability that will define the relationship for years to come. Whether that proves strategically wise depends on outcomes that remain uncertain. Cooper's broader message about extremism on both sides whilst maintaining clear support for Palestinian rights reveals sophisticated diplomatic thinking. She's avoiding the trap of moral equivalency whilst maintaining enough diplomatic flexibility to engage all parties. It's the kind of nuanced position that could make Britain genuinely useful in future negotiations. The international context of Cooper's speech, delivered during a UN General Assembly focus on Gaza, amplifies its significance. This isn't Britain making isolated policy announcements. This is Britain contributing to international momentum for Palestinian recognition that could fundamentally reshape Middle Eastern diplomacy. What emerges from Cooper's UN address is a vision of Britain as moral leader rather than reluctant follower in international affairs. Rather than waiting for American diplomatic leadership or European consensus, Britain is charting an independent course based on what it perceives as clear moral imperatives. It's a remarkable assertion of diplomatic independence that could define post-Brexit British foreign policy. The strategic brilliance of Cooper's approach lies in its combination of moral authority and political pragmatism. By framing Palestine recognition as both humanitarian necessity and diplomatic opportunity, she's created a position that's difficult to oppose without appearing morally callous or strategically naive. Cooper's direct challenge to Netanyahu, combined with broader criticism of extremism, positions Britain as a reasonable adult willing to hold all parties accountable. It's a diplomatic stance that could make Britain genuinely useful in future peace negotiations, assuming Cooper's gamble pays off strategically. The timing of Cooper's intervention, delivered whilst international attention focuses on Gaza, maximizes diplomatic impact whilst building international consensus for British positions. Rather than isolated policy announcements, this represents coordinated international diplomacy where Britain leads by example. What makes Cooper's position particularly compelling is a refusal to treat Palestinian statehood as a negotiating chip to be traded for Israeli concessions. By declaring it an inalienable right, she's removing it from the bargaining table, fundamentally reshaping the diplomatic parameters of future negotiations. The humanitarian language Cooper employs creates moral urgency that justifies dramatic policy shifts. By linking British recognition to humanitarian imperatives, she's made opposition appear morally questionable whilst positioning Britain as responding to crisis rather than creating controversy. This represents a fundamental shift from the cautious incrementalism that has defined British Middle Eastern policy for decades. Rather than careful diplomatic language designed to offend nobody, Cooper is making clear moral judgments that position Britain as a principled actor in international affairs. The broader implications extend far beyond Palestine recognition. Cooper's approach suggests a Labour government confident enough in its political mandate to take genuine risks for foreign policy objectives. It's a remarkable departure from the risk-averse approach that has characterized British diplomacy in recent years. Cooper's diplomatic revolution represents Britain's most significant foreign policy shift in decades, wrapped in humanitarian urgency and delivered with characteristic British understatement. Whether it proves strategically wise depends on outcomes that remain uncertain, but the audacity is undeniable. So there you have it. Yvette Cooper has fundamentally repositioned Britain's role in the world's most intractable conflict, and most of you probably heard about it third-hand through social media fragments. That's precisely why UK Connors exists, to cut through the noise and deliver the political analysis that actually matters. Subscribe now because tomorrow's revelations are already brewing in the corridors of power, and you'll want to understand them before they reshape your world. Britain's diplomatic revolution has begun, and you've just witnessed its opening gambit.